Hello humans, it's me. Today it is time to take action against anxiety. And I want to say that the answer to anxiety is action, because there is no resolution in thought. Instead, we must consider how thought is an activity of the mind and something that seems to be without material substance. And without material change, how can we be confident? And this is why one of the greatest things that men in particular can do, or people in general can do, is physical exercise. We often credit the people of the past as having better mental health than we do. And much of that comes from the fact that they had to be more physically active as well. And they did not have as much money as we do, but the money they had was more real, and it was based human labor and material commodities. And I respect that, because the real economy comes from the earth, and the energy of the earth comes from the sun, and the humans are meant to rise with the sun, or even before the sun, as we're doing here. And so we must be in alignment with coming up from the earth. And people have these ideologies of bringing down economic development from the sky, and this is their folly. They try to bring about the Federal Reserve and financial manipulation to grow the economy, and yet it is unwise, it is unsustainable. We say that our economy is unsustainable, that our way of life is unsustainable. If we could take the time to not have such an inflationary, debt-based economy, then at the same time we can have an economic system that may stop trying to grow itself to extinction. That is my message. But what else is there to say? We have to live in this world that seems to be doomed. We have to live in this country that may be doomed. Well, we must admit that every country that has existed before has ended at some point. Every empire that has existed ended at some point. These are relatively abstract things, and the material basis of human life is, of course, matter. That matter is formed in particular shapes, presumably according to the structure of the DNA of the creatures involved, with DNA being its own complex chemical structure, having its own complex chemical structure as a chemical compound. And the DNA persists through the people unless they are completely destroyed. The peoples, like I almost said to you that every people that has existed has been destroyed, but I think that's less true than saying the same of states, nations, empires, because nations, empires, and states are dependent on their organizational coherence, but the survival of a people or its bloodline or its DNA is not as dependent, or it's more materially persistent. So as long as people of that group continue to exist, even if they change their language, their allegiance, their culture, their religion, if those things change but they survive and they have their own children, then the bloodline continues. And so for that reason, you can trace your ancestry back thousands of years Not precisely, but you can imagine it. You can imagine your ancestors thousands of years ago, waddling through the mud, planting seeds, harvesting crops, things like that. You can imagine people of thousands of years ago having to cut down trees themselves with no power saw, having to till their own fields with a horse plow if they're lucky. And these are things that we should consider. We should first consider how people were able to live and survive in prior conditions. We give ourselves so much credit for our medicine and our society. The culture we live in gives itself so much credit for its tolerance and its other self-proclaimed virtues. But we must consider how these things are somewhat ephemeral, somewhat contingent, and maybe not necessarily ends in themselves. I would argue that the values that we promote are the values that are useful for capitalism. The social values that we promote, that the society promotes, maybe not what you promote or what I promote. This is the values that our society promotes are the values that are useful for capitalism. So integration, uniformity, homogeneity, superficial homogeneity, reductionism. These things make it easier to market to a mass audience. These things make it easier to expand the customer base and to simplify the customer base. The corporate agenda is to make people as similar to each other as possible and to give them mental illnesses so that they have to buy more products to recover from their illnesses. The corporate model wants people to be sick and physically ill to the extent that it would make them more profitable. The society wants people to be socially isolated and struggling, depressed, anxious, and mentally ill if that is beneficial to its profits. So it's for these reasons that, again, I say that the economy, the real economy, comes from the earth, and the fake economy comes from financial manipulation. I would say that if we could exercise some financial discipline, if we could not be so wild with our spending and our debt, if we could be more wise with these things, I believe that many of our other problems would be solved as well. Perhaps we could stop trying to destroy the environment with our economic development. Perhaps there would be less pressure for companies to grow at all costs because, for example, if we had a currency based at least flexibly on the value of precious metals like gold, silver, platinum, copper, iron, things like that to varying extents, then, well, there's at least something objective about that. There's something stable about that. Maybe 1 ounce of gold is worth, you could have a conversion chart of sorts and you could, vary the conversion rates for government currency. So maybe, I don't know what the current price of gold is, for example. Let's just say it's $100 for a pound of it. And then, or an ounce, whatever. So if gold is $100 an ounce, then iron is, something less than that per ounce. And silver would be somewhere in between, and copper would be less than all of those. And you basically just have a spectrum of metal values based on what is more available and things like that. So, this is what I recommend, or this is a plausible option, I'd say. I think that we need some objective basis for the currency. I don't really trust GDP estimates. Like, how is there any accountability in a GDP estimate? Like, couldn't people just make that up? Like, anybody can manipulate their records to make it seem like they have a larger GDP. Obviously, there are limits, but I personally am not seeing any accountability of how GDP is calculated, so I don't trust that as a measurement. And well, what else is there to say? So I think that there are other things that we could do to connect to the earth, to bring back the real economy. I think that I would like to promote a system where we sleep in darkness and are awake during the day. That's obvious. That seems obvious, but we're now in a system where we artificially suppress our sleep. So we have electric lighting, and we have these windows and blinds that can block the light from coming in. And the issue with that is people can basically ignore the implied circadian rhythm of the day-night cycle. And so in this way, we're also detached from nature. We're also detached from the physical basis of the world. And for this reason, I think in the future there should be curtain blinds that automatically move themselves. Say it's 10 p.m. by the point that the sun has fallen, completely at least, you can have curtain blinds that automatically close themselves. And then by the time that you want to wake up, say like 4 a.m. or 6 a.m, whenever, the blinds automatically open themselves, because the best natural method of waking up is sunlight. So as for me, I've had to compromise. I have to kind of leave a gap in my window so that some light can come in. And if you want to try this out, you can do a moderate approach where some light comes in from the outside. And then I think that just having a little bit of sunlight is enough to get started. Anyway, so I've really been thinking a lot about this topic of the fake economy, because even years ago I learned about the fractional reserve banking system. In case you're not familiar, the fractional reserve banking system is basically allows banks to lend money they don't have, or to lend money that was already lent to somebody else. So this system allows people to, take out loans, to take out a loan from a bank, deposit it in a different bank, and then the other bank can use that loan from that other bank to lend it again. And what this means is that the amount of debt in the economy is greater than the amount of money in the economy. So if you took all the money that exists in the entire country, or all the money of one currency that exists in the entire world, if you took all that together, you could try to pay off the debt, and the debt would still be there. It's like the time of Jesus. It's like the people have sinned so much. There's no repayment program good enough to save them. And now our debts are so great, there's no repayment plan realistically good enough to save our asses from how much debt we have. If we look at the United States government, federal government debt, it's extremely large, and it seems like nobody's actually trying to stop it. It's as if neither politician running for president right now is really talking about how our debt policy causes inflation. People might point out the inflation and complain about it and blame the opposition for it, but the inflation is caused significantly, at least, by debt. And whether it's the government borrowing money, banks borrowing money from the Federal Reserve, people, consumers, people like you and me borrowing money through credit cards and other means, this creates new money. This is why the Federal Reserve raises interest rates in response to inflation, and I think the financially wise thing for the good of the country is for the interest rates to be even higher. Now, I will say, I'm pretty sure that giving out loans with interest goes against the Bible, so that's an issue. But apart from vehicles passing by, I'd say that, I guess Nietzsche said we're in the death of God phase. God is dead, and I guess so we can lend out money with interest now. Maybe that's how it works. And, anyway, I think that, I think it's worthwhile, since this is the economy we have, since we already have a Federal Reserve, as much as I may think that we should audit the Federal Reserve, I'd also be sympathetic to their cause if they said that they had to raise interest rates even higher, because that is plausibly relevant to how inflation works, because it is based on the money supply. And the idea of blaming it on corporate greed is non-essential. It's tangential. It's supplementary. Despite all the bad things I said about the corporations earlier, there's still the rational optimum, theoretically, that each business is approaching. So for whatever good or commodity someone is selling, they can offer it at prices that are viable for the consumers, at least as long as there's enough demand for the product or service. If you're selling sacrilegious candles or your bath water, that it might only get you so far. There might be a very small market for that. But for typical standard commodities and services that people generally need, such as groceries, there's always a price point that would be profitable for the vendor, and the consumers, as long as they can afford it, will spend that money on the commodity as long as they need it enough. And for that reason, the idea of corporate greed is a bit, it's obviously a real thing, I'll say that first, but we have to consider how the corporations are first of all responding to their environment. They first must survive. They must continually earn money to sustain themselves, because the businesses are also taking on debt. So when we talk about when we try to teach business to young people in schools, we often use very simplified examples, and when we talk about business in common speech, we often frame it as the business simply sells commodities and pays costs, and its costs are directly proportional to what it's selling, such that if some business is selling 10 widgets, then its its cost can be proportionalized to the 10 widgets that it's selling. But we must consider how it's now common practice, very common practice for businesses to take on debt, such that if you are a business that's not allowed to take on debt, then you're not allowed to take out loans, then you're likely to not be able to survive. So many of the companies that close, their issue is the debt being overwhelming and being unable to borrow more money to sustain that debt. This is why this overwhelming debt, this is why bankruptcy exists. Because for another reason is that, I have not mentioned, is that the human tendency is to take advantage of such things. So, this is very obvious in the case of like student loans. These young people, they are going through school as early as middle school or earlier even. People are talking about college, like, oh, you have to go to college, and they're telling that to everybody basically. And they make you feel like, oh, if you can't go to college, then you're doing bad, or you're not smart enough or something. If college's requirements are too high with their test scores, that's evil. Because this is how people think about it. But again, this whole college thing is detached from the real economy to a large extent. So I've learned about some of the history of colleges and universities, and it does seem like there was a legitimate purpose to what we now call liberal arts. And it does seem that there is some good in people learning history and culture and classic literature and things like that. The people of the past, if we go back 100, 200 years ago, they were more commonly knowledgeable about, say, like Greek or Latin, or about the classic texts of those related time periods of classical antiquity. And now that's not really the case. We tend to just translate the text into English instead, and something is probably lost in the process, because English is the language of England, first of all, which was a barbarian land at the classical period of ancient Greece, for example. So how can the language of northwestern barbarians, so quote unquote, be equivalent to what ancient Greeks were talking about? So that's what I'd say. But anyway, there was something else I wanted to say. So people have a tendency to take on debt that they can't afford to pay, they can't manage to pay. So, for example, a lot of people will take out car loans. They want to get that nice Dodge Charger. They want to get that Ford Mustang. They want to get that cool car, the Porsche, the Cadillac, whatever. And it's this cool looking vehicle. It's fast, it's flashy, it's raises social status and stuff like that. But it's unsustainable. It takes debt. And the debt is whatever debt you take on, you have to pay on extra from what you borrowed. And so for that reason, it's not sustainable, it's not realistic. So people keep taking on debt that they can't afford to pay, because the incentive of that quick money is so strong. So for that reason, they keep doing it. And with the student loans, it's a similar issue. So with the student loans, people, especially young people, they're being pressured from a young age to go to college. And it's not necessarily that they should go to college, at least not at that age. I thought about it, and it's very much a pipeline. I hear people talking about the school to prison pipeline, but we should talk about the school to school pipeline, the school to debt pipeline. How about that? Debt is its own type of prison. It's an abstract prison. And this leads me to the other topic, which is the what I call the dialectic of exploitation. And this concept of moral progression. So people want to think that the humans of today are morally better than the people of the past, and I don't think that's actually true. I think we could very well be just as evil as the people of the past, maybe a little more, a little less, who knows, but my main thesis is that it's not that these moral changes we made us truly better or completely better, but that we traded one form of evil for another. We traded one method of evil for another. We traded one type of exploitation for another. So my theory is that the primordial nature of exploitation goes back to life itself. So the plants exploit the earth, the dirt, the nutrients in the earth. We can think of these as inert things that with no feeling or thought or pain to experience, and the plants, I think, are not conscious, and they don't need to be. But I've been in arguments about that before. But anyway, the point is that, for now, that the plants, they dig their roots into the earth and take the nutrients from the earth. And that in itself is a type of exploitation. Now, as for because it's at least depriving it from someone else, from the earth. It's at least depriving the earth of its own nutrients to go into the plant. The dirt I'm referring to as the earth. And now I could speak of it as exploiting the sun, and maybe so, but I would only say that in the sense of it denying light to another creature. So in many forests, the shade of the tall trees blocks out the light for the smaller plants. So this is why many forests, many stable forests, may not have underbrush if they have a thick upper canopy. So that's noteworthy. Let's see. Anyway, so we've definitely talked a lot about a lot of things here. If there's one thing I want to emphasize from this video, it's that we have what I call a fake economy, and I want to advocate for what I'd call a real economy. And a real economy must have probably some objective basis for its currency, such as exchange for metals. I would say like metals are pretty stable. So I would say we could have an exchange rate system that uses multiple types of metal like iron, copper, gold, silver, platinum. We could probably use all of those to some extent. Like you submit your $10 and you get like an ounce of copper or something. I don't know what the prices are, but that's just an example. I would say if we have less of a debt-based economy, then we'd also move towards a real economy, because I think this concept of infinite growth depends on debt. This compulsion to keep growing infinitely is dependent on the debt economy, and it's dependent on our debt infrastructure. And I guess I'd also say that the debts that we've accrued as individuals and as polities, as cities, states, and a nation, or nations in general, these debts are so large that we need a financial Jesus, so to speak. We need something to save us from our sins, and our sin is the debt that we've accumulated. And so that's what I'd say. This was an early morning walk with your boy Byron of Goatland, and let's continue later.